para ma-adjust natin. Sige. Good evening mga ka-YouTubers natin. Good evening once again. Welcome to the live streaming of our task training by Elsa Cañete. And the aim of this program is for you to have a better task compliance. And thank you po sa mga subscribers natin. Umabot na po tayo ng 3,530 subscribers po. So thank you very much. Doon sa mga hindi pa nag-subscribe, please subscribe to our channel and we promise to bring you more updates on taxation matters. And shout out po pala doon sa mga ka-YouTubers natin, especially those who have attended our free bookkeeping seminars. No? Napakarami po ng mga umattend and hopefully ay natuto naman po tayo kahit konti lang. No? At pasensya na kayo dun sa mga kapalpakan po namin sa training. Hindi po talaga perfect. Especially, pinanood ko po kasi ulit yung replay. Lalo-lalo na po dun sa June namin na free bookkeeping. Naku, Diyos ko, hindi po talaga worth it. Pero dun sa mga nag-attend na noong June, pwede replay nyo na lang yung mga other episode po natin ng free bookkeeping para naman po ma-augment yung kakulangan namin doon. Kasi that was our first time po na nag-online at nakita ko talaga yung mga pagkukulang. So, pasensya na po kayo at sisikapin naman po namin na ma-improve po namin yung aming training. No? And ang dami po mga katanungan doon na halos hindi lahat na sagot. Kaya nga sabi ko, dito sa live streaming, siguro we focus more not on the lecture but on the question and answers para naman po mabigyan namin ng sagot yung inyong mga katanungan na minsan sa dami, mayroong mga nakaligtaan talaga kung isa-isahin mo. So, sabi ko, during the online streaming, babawi na lang po kami sa inyo so that yung mga may katanungan po talaga ay at sasagutin po natin. Kasi, although meron tayong mga assigned topics during the live streaming, pero ang priority po namin, masagot talaga yung katanungan ninyo dito sa question and answer portion po. May question na?
Ma'am, wala pa po, pero...
Shout out.
Shout out ko, ma'am. Si username niya, ma'am, Ice Bear. Hi daw po, ma'am Elsa.
Hi, Iceberg. First time niya dito.
Kung sino po si Ice Bear, ano na lang po yung real name para mabati namin. Tapos ma'am, si Ma'am Mary Grace Randrap.
Ay, always yan. Si Miss Mary Grace, always po yan. Good evening. Picturean mo uli. Kahit dyan mo na picturean.
Ma'am, si Sir Donald Esperida. Online siya, ma'am. Good PM daw po. Tapos si Ma'am Sheila Estrada, ma'am.
Okay.
Good PM din daw po.
Okay, so good evening po. And this time our topic would be about the business restructuring, no? Kasi very important po ito sa transfer pricing. Yeah. Excuse lang po ka-YouTubers kasi medyo inaayos namin yung camera at saka yung dito.
Shoutout ko na rin, ma'am, si Ma'am Rhea Soriano at Sir Jomar de la Paz, ma'am. Naka-tune in na po
parang
sila.
Nakatanga sa camera. Parang nakatanga. Yeah. Okay na lang. Parang nakatanga sa camera eh. Oh. Sige. I-focus mo ng konti. Kasi parang ang liit, ang laki ng space. Sige. Okay na. Okay na. Okay na.
Ma'am, si Ma'am Rhea, sabi po, na-receive niya na daw po yung book.
Okay. Thank you. So siya yung nag-order din.
Yes, ma'am.
Sa
Tapos ma'am, good evening daw po, sabi ni Sir Jo Marie de la Paz.
Oh, always. Always, Sir Jo Marie, bilib ako dito sa bata na to, no? Yan ang mga sign na mga asenso sa buhay, no? Seryoso sa buhay. May tiyaga, Kaya yung may tiyaga, may nilaga po talaga yan.
Tas ma'am,
Masipag.
shoutout daw po si Ma'am Sandra Eborda.
Okay.
Good evening daw po, ma'am.
Sige, good evening, Miss Sandra.
Tas ma'am,
Okay.
ito ma'am, mga pumapasok po ngayon ma'am, si Ma'am Emerita Beduya. Hello daw po, ma'am.
Ay, hello, Miss Emerita.
Tapos ma'am, may
Good
question
evening.
na tayo, ma'am. Galing po kay Ice Bear. Yun talaga yung username niya, ma'am.
Anong...
Out of topic po na question.
Ah.
Engineering consultancy po kasi business ko.
Opo.
Lahat po ba ng services ko like drawing ng engineering plans kailangan mag-withhold si customer? Salamat daw.
Opo. Wala pong kasi exemption ang withholding, especially yung services po yung ino-offer nyo, services, may withholding po talaga. No, kahit hindi siya top withholding agent, since services yung hinahire niya, may mga ordinary services talaga na kahit hindi top withholding agent, dapat po talaga withhold yung supplier nyo. Ibig sabihin yung binibentahan mo ng services, so kahit na ikaw ay sila ay hindi top withholding agent, kailangan din nila mag-withhold, no? Yung engineering services sa construction, so magkano yung kanilang wini-withhold? 2% ng fee, no? Bago ibigay sa iyo. So depende kasi sa nature ng services niyo. Pag highly technical, lahat mas mataas yung withholding. Pero yung sabi na natin na general contractor, 2% po yan.
Ma'am, shoutout po si Ma'am. Ang username niya, ma'am, I am Accountant Raylin. Good evening daw po.
Okay,
ma'am.
good evening. Good evening, Raylin. Mga bago ito
Mga bago,
no?
ma'am.
Mga bago kasi yung mga datihan na natin, new name, no? Pero welcome. Yung mga bago lang po na YouTubers natin ngayon, welcome po. And hopefully, magkaroon tayo ng fruitful na discussion during the night, no? Para yung atin namang discussion about business restructuring, which is part of the transfer pricing, ito po ay, sabi ko na nga kanina sa inyo, since sobrang dami, nireview ko po kasi yung mga dun sa free bookkeeping natin, ang dami-dami pa pong questions, pasensya na po talaga na hindi na kayanan na sagutin. No? Although ang dami ding nasagot, pero may mangilan-ngilan pa rin na hindi kasama na nasagot. So sabi ko, tutukan po natin yung mga question and answer so that magkaroon din sila ng outright na sagot po dun sa mga questions. No?
Ma'am, ngayon ma'am, may isang question ma'am from Ma'am Emerita Beduya. Ang sabi niya po, ask ko lang po kung government po, client mo, wala po bang babayaran na VAT dahil may VAT withheld na?
Yes, sa ngayon po, wala na. Pero comes January 1, 2021, ang 5% na creditable withholding na ang VAT sa gobyerno, hindi na final. So, meaning, mag-compute ka na, posibleng may bayaran na. Depende yan sa computation nyo. Kung marami kayong input, then pwedeng wala nang bayaran. Pero kung kakaunti lang yung input nyo, posibleng may babayaran pa. Dahil yung withhold nila na 5% ng gobyerno, maaaring hindi sapat yan sa 12% na VAT. Especially kung yung presumptive input mo na 7%, ay kulang yung actual na input mo, then may babayaran ka pa. Pero kung sobra naman, then maaaring wala ka nang babayaran.
Ma'am, ito po may na-retrieve akong isang question dun po sa seminar natin, ma'am. Mga natabunan. Ang tanong po niya, ma'am, ano daw po masasabi niyo sa additional 12% tax sa mga digital services sa consumer kasi ipapasa for sure ang cost?
Yung sabi niyo na additional tax, actually, business tax po yan, ang sinasabi mo 12% na value added tax, pass on to consumer. Tama po kayo na pinapasa yan sa consumer, so add up yan doon sa cost nyo. Pero pwede nyo pong i-adjust yan, not necessarily na maging ganun yung effect kasi ang tax naman is a tax on value added. So kung nag-markup lang kayo ng konti, then posibleng konti din yung magiging VAT nyo. No? Kasi value added tax is a tax on value added. So kung magkano yung minarkup nyo, doon na po siya magkakaroon ng tax base yung 12% na VAT natin. So kung maliit lang yung markup nyo, then maliit lang din yung pinaka-VAT na maipasa nyo din sa kliyente because meron po kayong tinatawag na input VAT. Especially kung imported dyan, meron tayong tinatawag na input VAT on importation. Binabayaran po yan sa customs.
Ito ma'am, isa pa po sana retrieve ko. Will BIR eventually phase out manual bookkeeping and then switch to digital?
Siguro eventually in the near future kasi in-encourage po talaga ng gobyerno natin na mag-computerize na po yung mga tao. Especially kung mapapansin niyo dito sa Electronic Commerce Act natin na since wala nang ang kahoy, wala nang mga papel, so ini-encourage po natin yung paperless. No? So comes the time siguro na napakarami ng software, nag-off patent na yung iba, pwede mo nang gamitin, hindi na mahal ang mga software. So, posible po na darating yung panahon na talagang wala ng manual na books of accounts, electronic na po lahat. No? Kasi marami po ang advantages pagka electronic na. At ini-encourage po talaga siya ng gobyerno.
Ito po may question po ulit. Galing po kay Pau Esquizo. Yun ang username niya, ma'am.
Okay.
po,
Hello, Pao. Yes, good evening. Alam niyo, nalulungkot ako kasi dati ako, sabi ko na nga sa inyo, for 17 years, trainer na ako, speaker. Sasanay ako na nagsasalita na nandyan sa harap ko yung kausap. Parang masaya ka na ano. Ngayon, parang hindi masaya na yung camera lang yung nakikita ko. Pero nung tingnan ko po, ni-review ko yung sa yung free bookkeeping na napakarami na mga messages doon sa comment na nag-hi, nag-hello, pero hindi nasagot para naman. Sabi ko, kahit naman pala camera lang, pero the person on the other side of the camera, kung titingnan natin, nandun din pala, live din sila, at nag-e-effort din para matuto, no? So, yun lang yung pagkakaiba ng face-to-face at saka yung online po natin. Pero alam ko na nandyan din kayo at alam ko na nakikinig din kayo at nag-interact po tayo. Kaya sagutin po namin yung mga tanong nyo.
Ito po, basahin ko po yung question niya. Meron po bang tinatawag na franchise tax? Kunwari, kami po ang franchisor, then may nag-franchise sa amin. May babayaran po ba kaming tax sa binayad ni franchisee?
Ang tawag po doon royalty. Kasi ang payment po sa franchise is an intangible. Pagka pinarentahan mo yan, pinagamit mo sa iba, ang payment po na tinatanggap mo, ang tawag po dyan ay royalty. Meron po. And royalty is subject to final withholding tax of 20%.
Ito ma'am, shoutout po kay ma'am Georgina Chua. Sabi niya po, salamat po sa new learnings.
Good evening po, Miss Georgina.
Tapos, ito ma'am question po from Sir Vir Garcia. Ang tanong niya po, may ginagawa po bang hakbang ang BIR para maging online na ang registration ng new taxpayers katulad sa ibang bansa?
Mayroon na din po, kaya nga ang inumpisahan ay itong mga forms natin at saka yung TIN. Yung application ng TIN is also part of the registration, kaya meron na po tayong mga online TIN at paparami na po yan. No? So, ang next move siguro dyan ng BIR na lahat-lahat na pati primary, secondary registration ay gagawin na rin online. Especially po ngayon na may COVID, so the demand is there. Kaya may mga initiative na din po na inuumpisan po ang BIR.
Tapos sabi po ma'am ni Sir Vir Garcia, masaya po kami pag nakikita namin kayo, madam, at nag-share ng wisdom nyo.
Thank you po talaga. No? Nakakatuwa. Kaya sabi ko parang nakaka-addict din pala itong online na parang pag naumpisan mo, nahahanap-hanapin mo. Saka especially yun, natuwa talaga ako sa sobrang dami doon sa bookkeeping. And then, ang daming mga concern, ang daming mga greetings, ang daming mga, sabi ko ganito pala. Parang feeling ko kasi parang wala lang kasi habang nagsasalita ako, hindi ko nakikita yung mga comments or whatever kasi naka-focus ako dun sa mga dinidiscuss ko. But when I try to look at dun sa mga comments at saka mga greetings, napakarami pala. Kaya nga sabi ko next time, siguro during my talk, makikipag-interact na rin ako kasi alam ko nandiyan kayo.
Ma'am, si Ma'am Marie Grace Randrap may suggestion po.
Eh,
Sana
thank
daw
you.
po discuss nyo minsan computerized accounting system requirement and application process.
Application process, actually po nasa free bookkeeping na niyan, pero gagawaan ko po siya ng special na video kasi kasama po yun sa free bookkeeping. Actually po, yung bookkeeping na binibigay namin is advanced bookkeeping po talaga. Kasi we do not deal on the yung sinasabi na mga typical na journal entries, debit, credit. Yung dinidiscuss natin sa free bookkeeping na yan, yung mga rules and regulations in bookkeeping, computerized accounting. Kaya yung sinasabi mo, Ms. Marie Grace, na requirements na doon po nakadiskusyon under 29-2002 na Revenue Memorandum Order na sabi ko nga sa inyo, kasama po ako dyan sa gumawa ng Revenue Memorandum Order 29-2002 kung paano mag-apply ng permit to adopt computerized accounting system. Pero gagawin ko po yun. Kasi madali lang yun. Gagawin ko para maganda po ang suggestion yan kasi yung iba, sa sobrang haba kasi ng free bookkeeping, tama ka, hindi mo makikita kung nasaan doon yung computerized accounting system. Pero sa day 2 po yan ng last part. No? Kung gusto mo siyang panoorin, day 2, last part, yung panoorin mo yung July 31, no? Yun yung second day. Kasi yung afternoon, yun po yung unang discussions dyan. Pero tama po, thank you sa suggestion mo. Gagawa ko ng special video na who will i-discuss yung application lang sa pagkuha ng permit to adopt computerized accounting system.
Tas ma'am, shoutout po kay Kerlin Amistoso. Sabi niya po, thank you for this, ma'am.
Welcome po, Sherlyn, and thank you na nandiyan ka at open to acquire the knowledge that we share. Thank you. Kasi wala naman ding silbi na gusto mong share pero wala namang may gusto. So parang one-sided, no? Pero kung nagsishare ka tapos merong gusto makipag-share sa'yo, nakakatuwa, no?
Tapos sabi ma'am ni Ma'am Sandra Eborda, sarap pong makapanood po ng mga discussion nyo po, lalo na po sa taxation. Salamat po ma'am, mag-aabang po ako talaga ng mga live streaming nyo.
Thank you po. Thank you po. Thank you talaga, no? So, Miss Marie Grace Randrap, as always, and ito na, umpisa na po natin itong business restructuring na sinasabi ko sa inyo. But as a way of review, bakit po ba natin i-discuss itong business restructuring? Because this is part of our discussion on transfer pricing. At ano po ba ang transfer pricing? Transfer pricing is the pricing of goods and services between related parties. No? Bakit very much concerned po tayo dyan? Because that is the trend in the international taxation ngayon na yung mga conglomerates o yung mga multinational enterprises with group of companies, doon po tinitingnan kung paano nila tina-transfer yung goods and services nila at paano nila pina-price, no? Because nagiging tool po siya on how to lower their taxes kasi nakokontrol po nila yung pricing ng goods and services because related parties nga po sila. And on the part of the government, sa mga tax administrators naman natin, ginagamit nila yung transfer pricing as a tool to make a transfer pricing audit in order na malalaman din po nila at mabigay sa tamang state, sa tamang taxpayer yung tax na dapat bayaran because also of transfer pricing. Kaya dito naman sa Pilipinas, we already have our guidelines on transfer pricing. And the first is the Revenue Regulations 2-2013 on January 2013 po yun ginawa. That is the transfer pricing guidelines. And our transfer pricing guidelines, our transfer pricing law here in the Philippines is under Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code, that the wordings of that is similar, no? Word for word, verbatim, kinopya natin sa Section 482 of the Internal Revenue Code of the US. Kasi ang atin pong batas sa taxation dito sa Pilipinas nakapattern po sa US. At meron po tayong batas na yung mga jurisprudence po sa US, pwede po natin i-apply dito sa Pilipinas. And aside from the Revenue Regulations 2-2013, which is the first na talagang transfer pricing guidelines in the Philippines, meron tayo noong 2009 the guidelines on the revenue audit memorandum order 1-2019. Ito po yung audit guidelines, transfer pricing audit guidelines, no? Dito nakasaad kung paano ino-audit, ano yung mga requirements, ano yung mga documents, ano yung mga reports na gagawin, at saka ano yung mga kailangan isubmit sa examiner during the transfer pricing audit. No? Ang wala pa lang sa atin, as compared sa ibang bansa, yung mutual agreement procedures na guidelines at saka yung advanced pricing arrangement. But as to the transfer pricing audit, ginagawa na po. No? And then, meron tayong mga specific or mga special na revenue regulations na also related to transfer pricing. And yung mga na-discuss na po natin nung nakaraan, we discussed about the arm's length principle, which is the basis of transfer pricing, the internationally agreed principle in transfer pricing. Yan po yung arm's length. And what is that arm's length principle? That is the comparison, no? Kasi pag sabi natin na arm's length, dapat comparable ang related party transactions with the independent transactions, or the notion or the assumption that the independent transaction is the true transaction in the market because it has no element of control. Ang related party transactions kasi meron siyang element of control, that's why hindi yun ang real transactions or real price in the market, because it is influenced by the other party kasi magka-related lang nga sila. And ano yung purpose? To minimize tax payment. Benefits. Karoon sila ng benefits kaya yung price is dictated. So when we say that you compare the related party transactions with that of the independent transactions, we have to compare. And I have discussed to you sa mga nakaraan na the methods that are that would be used in transfer pricing, and also the comparability factors, the 5 comparability factors na ito po yung i-compare natin and using the transfer pricing methods. No? So, ano yun? As a way of review, our methods are the comparable uncontrolled price method, you compare the price. The resale price method and the cost plus method, you compare the gross profit. The transactional net margin method, you compare the net margin. And the profit split method, if the operation is highly integrated between related parties, then you are going to split the profit. Pagdating naman sa comparability analysis, we have the 5 factors. Ano itong mga factors? Ito yung i-compare natin. No? Halimbawa, nag-compare tayo ng price. Ano yung mga factors na kailangan i-compare natin from the independent party and the related party? No? So these are the 5 factors. Number 1, characteristic or nature of the property or services, of goods and services, whether tangible or intangible. And yung next is the FAR analysis, or the functions, the assets, and the rest. Na-discuss ko na po yan sa inyo. And then we have the contractual terms, no? Kung ano yung written in the contracts, the provisions in the contracts that have to be arm's length. And may isa pa sinabi dyan ang OECD. Tingnan nyo pa rin during the transfer pricing audit if the provision in the contracts are being followed. Kasi baka mamaya formality lang yung contract, hindi naman sinusunod. So we have 3 factors. The 4th factor is economic conditions, and the 5th is business strategies. Also, na-discuss na natin yan sa inyo. And nung nakaraan, we discussed to you the intra-group services and the valuation of intangible. No? Na-discuss na natin yan. So, this evening, we will discuss about business restructuring. No? So, ano ba ang business restructuring? At kailan nagbe-business restructuring ang isang company or isang entity? No? Okay. So, sabi po, business restructuring is a business decision made by top management of the entity to apply or adapt a new scheme, process, or strategies to improve its operation. So, may purpose po pala business restructuring. You restructure your business because you wanted to improve operation. Okay. So, that is the general reason kung bakit ka nag-restructure. Balikan natin yung tinatawag na arm's length principle. Ano ba yung arm's length principle? Yung Independent party transactions should be equal to or similar to related party transactions para maging arm's length. Okay, in this, sinabi ko lang no, a while ago about business restructuring. Ano sabi dito? The purpose is to improve its operation. So para masabi natin that the purpose of business restructuring is to improve operation, yun ang arm's length na reason or purpose kung bakit ka mag-restructure. Why? Because if the purpose of business restructuring is other than to improve its operation, then that is not arm's length. And when we say it's not arm's length, then there are tax issues or transfer pricing issues na kailangan titingnan natin. Kasi kung hindi yan arm's length, then we have to compare. At pag nakita natin na talagang may diferensya, hindi natin ma-account, then we have to adjust. And that's the time na during the adjustment, either may babayaran na deficiency taxes yung isang company. May question?
Wala ma'am, pero shoutout ko ma'am yung bagong tune-in natin ma'am, si Sir Jeff Mark Fernandez.
Yes. Always yan. Sir Jeff Mark Fernandez. Lagi yan siya.
Si ano po, Balmar Arce. Yan ma'am. Good evening daw po ma'am.
Okay.
So, bagong tune-in natin ma'am.
Sige. Good evening po sa mga bagong tune-in natin na YouTubers. Hi, hello. No? Ngayon ko lang maramdaman na talagang nandiyan kayo because nakita ko yung mga feedback sa live streaming. No? Kasi parang ako lang mag-isa dito eh. Parang kasama ko si Alvin lang at si Harry. Kaya parang hindi mo ma-feel. Pero nung makita ko yung mga comments, feel ko na. No, lalo na si Miss Mary Grace, na nakita ko pa, pati picture, no?
Ito ma'am, si Ma'am Aya Polido, kaka-tune-in lang po. At si Ma'am Janilane 22, good evening daw po.
Janilane
22.
Janilane 22.
Yun ma'am ang username niya.
Okay.
Tsaka po si Ma'am Aya Polido.
Si Miss Aya Polido, familiar talaga sa akin yan, no? Okay. So what are the reasons why business are restructuring? To improve management and control of the entities, to get rid of loss-making activity, to bargain for a more favorable option. So ito yung mga example ng mga purposes kung bakit nagkaroon ng business restructuring ang isang business. No? Another, to negotiate contracts. No? To negotiate contracts. Pag nag-negotiate ka kasi ng contracts, kailangan favorable sa iyo o kung hindi man fair to you or hindi ka malulugi. Kasi kung halimbawa pumasok ka sa kontrata na alam mong lugi ka, then that is not arm's length, no? To improve profit making activities. Why? What is the economic reason why the entity, corporations or persons go into business? Because they want to make profit. Kasi kung hindi profit ang gusto, then hindi sila classified as business, no? They will be classified as non-stock, non-profit organizations or whatever. Kasi ayaw nila ng kita eh, ayaw nila ng tubo. Pero kung classified ka as business taxpayer ka, then ang after mo talaga, yung end goal mo or purpose is to make profit, no? To increase efficiency and effectiveness of existing process. So, yun yung other reason why a business restructure its operation. So, what are the forms of business restructuring? We have new scheme, process, strategies to improve its operation. Example, conversion of full-fledged manufacturer into a toll manufacturer into a limited risk distributor or commissioner. Actually, dun po sa ating 5-day certificate program in transfer pricing, bibigay po kami dito ng mga case studies about this, yung actual na cases, no? Bibigay tayo for discussions. Ito yung conversion ng full-fledged manufacturer into a toll manufacturer or into a limited risk distributor or commissioners. Paano nangyari to? Pag full-fledged manufacturer ka, sa'yo lahat, no? Raw materials, direct labor, factory overhead. So, ibig sabihin, full-fledged ka. Pati yung end product mo, the inventory of the finished goods, yung work in process inventory, the raw materials, sa iyo lahat yan. Pero, pagka, halimbawa, hindi ka na full-fledged, toll manufacturer ka na lang, you are just doing services. Hindi ka na manufacturer. Why? Because you don't own the raw materials and then you don't own the finished goods. Kung sino yung nagpagawa doon, sa kanya yon. Ano na lang mabayaran sa inyo? Only the services or the tolling fees. No? So, yan ang full-fledged manufacturer at saka yung toll manufacturer lang. Sa toll manufacturer, classified yan siya as services. Pero doon sa full-fledged manufacturer, manufacturing po siya talaga. No? Nagmamanufacture ng goods and then binibenta niya. Another form of business restructuring is the transfer of tangible assets by restructured entity to a foreign associated enterprises. Ano yun? Tinransfer niya yung ownership ng assets. So, ibig sabihin, binenta niya. And this is one of the most common disputes na nakarating sa korte in the international court. No? Ito yung pinag-uusapan, especially the valuation of the assets being transferred. Kasi ang contention palagi ng tax authority na undervalued yung assets transferred to the new entity. Okay? Disposal of intangible rights by local operation to a central location. Ano yun? Intangible rights. At for your information, intangibles po talaga ngayon ang pinag-uusapan sa buong mundo. No? That's why sabi ko, although medyo mahina na ang aking mata, pero really, noong 2016 pa yan, that's the reason why I joined the World Conference of WIPO because ang hinahabol ko po talaga is intangible. No? I want to make a book on intangibles para magkaroon tayo ng guide on how to value. At saka magsasite ako ng mga cases in the international courts para lalo nating maintindihan, no? Kung how to deal with and how to value, how to recognize, how to measure these intangibles. This disposal of intangible rights by a local operation to a central location. No? So, ito rin ang maraming cases that reaches the Supreme Court. Transfer of contractual rights between associated enterprises. Ano ito yung contractual rights? Rights that arise because of contracts. No? Sinabi mong contracts, agreement. No? Kaya meron tayong mga tinatawag na contractual terms na ang contractual terms natin kasama doon sa comparability analysis when we compare, no, the related party and the independent parties. Another form is the continuance of loss-making activities. Ano yun? Continuance of loss-making activities. Loss na, pero kino-continue pa rin. No? And then another is outsourcing. And then the implementation of a central purchasing cost functions and the location savings. In this case of restructuring, meron itong mga transfer pricing issues, no? Na we can discuss thoroughly siguro sa ibang venue. Kasi malawak to eh, kagaya ng continuance of loss-making activities. When you hypothesize, you might ask the taxpayer, why do you continue a loss-making activities? Nagtatapon ka ng pera. No? And in fact, sa BIR, if 3 years na, then you continue your loss-making activities, fraudulent na. Why? Because under the transfer pricing, if you try to make a study on transfer pricing, this loss-making activities is not really losing. Why? Because sometimes it is doing business service to the parent company. Kaya loss siya dito sa Pilipinas. And who is the one making profit? The parent company or the related party is situated somewhere around the world na doon yung sales. Kasi dito sa Pilipinas, serbisyo lang. Kaya loss ka talaga kasi wala kang income dito. So, how are you going to treat that in transfer pricing? Ako, I recommend use the profit split. Why? Because the operation is highly integrated, and when it is highly integrated such that wala pang comparables because the business is unique. So, ang gagawin mo ngayon, split mo yung profit para naman yung contribution ng Pilipinas sa pinaka-head office na nandoon yung sales, we would also be compensated at magbayad din ng tax dito, hindi yung puro loss making na lang. And then outsourcing, no? How do you outsource? Ang nakita ko sa when I audit, no, nasa BIR pa ako, nakita ko na karamihan ng outsourcing, yung ina-outsource nila yung mga spare parts, no? Halimbawa, manufacturing ng car, manufacturing ng mga equipments or mga machineries. Yung isang spare parts nila, ina-outsource nila sa iba. No? Instead of sila pa yung gagawa ng lahat ng spare parts, may mga parts sila na ina-outsource so that assemble na lang nila. Implementation of a central purchasing cost functions. Why? Because pag nandoon lahat ng cost functions mo, na control mo yung risk, no? Especially sa recognition ng inventory. Why? Kasi ngayon, napakalaking bagay ng inventory sa audit. No? For your information, lahat kayo ngayon na nakikinig sa akin, ayusin nyo na yung inventories nyo. Kasi kasama yan sa diniscuss ko sa transfer pricing, which is a very, very good source of deficiency taxes. No? Especially sa inventory, sa purchases, especially sa VAT. Ang dali-dali po nating matitrace up sa inventories because your beginning and ending inventories, you just add your purchases and then deduct yung nabenta nyo. No? Kasi ang inventory natin at cost. So magkano ba yung gross profit mo? I-add up na lang yun doon. And then yung ending mo na inventory, no? Ano mo din yun, ibawas mo sa na sold mo, cost of goods sold mo. Ibawas mo yung ending inventory at cost. Then malalaman mo na how much inventory should have been sold. No? So kung may mga undeclared ka o kaya hindi mo na declared during the ITR mo, tsaka during the purchases mo sa VAT, hindi magtatali yun, then you will be assessed of deficiency taxes. No? Pero akong ginawa na inventory analysis, 85 million ang diferensya. So, 85 million multiplied by 30%. How much is that? No? 0.3, 80, 24, almost 30 million na yan plus ano mo pa, penalties. No? Eh kung mga 2017, 2018 yan. No? At 12% per annum. No? So yung aabot na yan ng more or less 40 to 50 million na deficiency. Sobrang laki na. Mahal. Kaya take note of your inventories. No? Yung mga CPAs natin na nakikinig ngayon, gumawa na kayo ng inventory analysis nyo para doon sa mga kliyente nyo. Gawan nyo na bago pa sila ma-deficiency ng BIR and then gawan nyo na yung amendments yung inyong inventory para magtali sa purchases nyo sa VAT at saka sa income tax. Okay. So how are we going to apply the arm's length principle in business restructuring? No? Okay. Excuse me. Inom muna tayo ng kape, sa lalamunan. No? Katatapos lang namin mag-video recording ng 8 video recording, but it's about the other channel, yung values formation natin. No? Mga tips, mga aral ng buhay, no? Mga tips na sinishare din natin para makapulutan ng mga aral. Kasi hindi lang aral ng taxation po yung binibigay natin, pati yung aral sa personal na buhay. No? Meron din tayo na YouTube channel, yung mga aral ng buhay ni Mami Elsa. Na umpisahan na at hopefully we can bring you. Nandiyan naman po yan sa featured channel ng tax training. Kung curious kayo, pwede nyo rin pong puntahan at medyo down kayo, pwede nyo ring basahin just to uplift your spirit at saka just to uplift also, you give strength kung medyo nanghihina kayo. No? Maganda kasi minsan na remind tayo eh. Kasi dito sa tax, master natin yung tax, pero the other side of us, hindi natin master. So, kakaroon tayo ng gap sa buhay natin. Kaya, dapat balanse. No? Hindi tayo matalino lang sa tax, dapat matalino din tayo sa other side. Kaya nagsishare lang po tayo ng mga aral ng buhay doon. Kasi natutunan natin yon with the 63 years tayo na nandito sa mundo. Sabi ko, saan ko ba gagamitin itong mga aral na napulot ko? No? Because I was a values formation trainer ng BIR and we were trained also by the government. Sabi ko, saan ba natin ito gagamitin? So, thank you sa YouTube at YouTube give us the opportunity and the means to share no, our experiences. So, nandyan po yan. Tingnan na lang po ninyo sa featured channel po ng tax training. Question? Oh, wala pa. Nakikinig pa, no? So, sana nakikinig pa kayo kasi maganda yung discussion natin sa business restructuring.
Ayun, ma'am, sabi po ni Sir Jeff Mark Fernandez, galing nga ni ma'am, para akong nag-aral ng accounting course kapag nakikinig ako sa live. Yes,
sige, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Ano sabi po dito? Arm's length principle should be applied in business restructuring. Balikan natin yung arm's length principle. Ano ba yon? Related party transaction should be similar to independent party transaction. So, ibig sabihin, pag nag-restructure ka ng business, yung reason mo should also be similar to that independent transactions on their reasons kung bakit sila nag-restructure. No? Kasi kung may iba kang reason bakit ka nag-restructure, then it's not arm's length. Comparability analysis should be done for the restructuring transactions to determine the conditions made or imposed between associated enterprises, preferably on the functions performed, assets used, and risk assumed by the parties, and also the terms or conditions of the contract, economic circumstances, and business strategies. So, kahit pala business restructuring siya, gagamitin pa rin natin yung 5 comparability factors. And what are those 5 comparability factors na gagamitin natin? Yung diniscuss natin kanina sa inyo. No? So, kasama na yung nature, characteristics of goods and services, whether tangible or intangible, the functions, assets, and risks, the contractual terms, the economic conditions, the business strategies. No? So, hindi naman nagbabago ang transfer pricing kahit anong okasyon, kahit anong sitwasyon. No? Kasi I try to look at yung bago na transfer pricing guidelines na February 2020 lang po. Yung transfer pricing guidelines on financial transactions, the same pa rin, no? It also applies the 5 comparability factors on financial transactions. Napakarami pong issues sa financial. Okay. The following intangible assets, no? So ito yung mga patents, trademarks, trade names, design or models, copyrights, or literary, artistic, or scientific work. Bakit natin sinasabi itong mga intangible properties na to? Kasi ito yung source na talagang, pag nag-restructure sila, ito yung source ng issues. Okay. Ano pa yung intellectual property? Know-how, trade secrets, customers list, distribution channels, unique means, symbols, or features. They can be intangibles, no? Business restructuring should also be disclosed in the financial statements. No? So, hindi lang yan sa transfer pricing guidelines. Even in the disclosure to financial statements, sa accounting standards, nire-require din po yan na the business restructuring should be disclosed in the financial statements. Okay. Papaano? Ano yung mga i-disclose sa financial statements about business restructuring? Okay, so the entities shall disclose the following: a brief description of the nature of the obligations and the expected timing of any resulting outflows of economic benefits. Kasi nga sabi natin, hindi ka naman mag-restructure na walang benefits. Kasi if you restructure and then wala siyang economic benefits, then that is not arm's length. No? Yung business restructuring mo can be considered as sham transaction and that can be disallowed as if walang business restructuring na nangyari. Also, an indication of uncertainties about the amount of time or timing of those outflows. Wrong timing yung business restructuring mo. Where necessary to provide adequate information to entity, shall disclose the major assumptions made concerning future events. So may mga assumptions ka na i-disclose. Bakit ka nag-restructure? Especially the future events. No? The amount of expected reimbursement, stating the amount of any asset that has been recognized for the expected reimbursement. No? Kung halimbawa, yung restructuring mo, such that result to reimbursement. So, ano yung sabi niya? Stating the amount of any asset that has been recognized for expected reimbursement. Kasi nag-restructure ka. Okay. Sabi nga natin, our transfer pricing guidelines here in the Philippines are patterned from the OECD or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Aside from the fact na nagkaroon din tayo ng referral or reference to the United Nations transfer pricing guidelines, no? Pero yung leading talaga natin na reference is the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, no? So, ano-ano po yung business restructuring na guidelines dito sa OECD, no? So, discuss ko na kanina sa inyo yung restructuring kung paano ginagawa, no? Yung full-fledged, ito naman, full-fledged distribution, and then, ginawa na lang siya na limited risk distributor or commissioner. So, instead na distributor siya na full-fledged, nagiging commissioner na lang siya for a foreign associated enterprises that may operate as principal. Paano po nangyari to? Pag sinabi mo kasi na full-fledged distribution ka, you're engaged in the distribution of goods, no? And then, paano yan nangyari? Yung goods, binibili mo or owned by the manufacturer, and then ikaw yung nagdi-distribute. So, paano ka kumikita? Nagma-markup ka, no? So, at isa pa, you also own the inventory. Kasi binili mo yung inventory, and then binenta mo, distribute mo, at price na paano mo binili doon sa manufacturer. So, hindi ka na full-fledged distributor. Ginawa ka na lang limited risk distributor or commissioner. No? If you are a limited risk distributor or commissioner, kasi commission na lang nire-receive mo, you don't own the inventory. So, wala ka ng inventory na mini-maintain. So, ano-anong magiging implication dyan? Bababa yung cost mo. Bakit? Kasi wala ka ng mini-maintain na inventory. Bababa din yung risk mo. Bakit? Kasi kung wala kang inventory, the risk of obsolescence, the risk of theft in inventory, wala na sa iyo lahat yan. Kasi wala kang inventory na mini-maintain. No? Kasi kung makabenta ka, that's the time na i-deliver yung goods. That is the time na bayaran ka ng parent company as commission doon sa ginawa mong sale. No? Pero kung full-fledged distributor ka, sa iyo lahat. You maintain the inventory, and then also you suffer you own the risk for the inventory. Kung nawala, kung na-obsolete, kung na-damage, so you own that also. Pero kung commissioner ka lang, wala yan. Nandoon lahat yan sa parent company or somebody designated as owner of the inventory. Nandiyan pa?
Nandiyan po sila, ma'am.
Nandiyan.
May first time na nanood sa atin, ma'am, si ma'am Amy Tagle. Sabi niya, first time watching you live. Very helpful.
Sige. Good evening and welcome, Miss Amy.
Amy, ma'am eh. Amy Tagle.
Oh. Welcome, Miss Amy Tagle. No? Okay. So, continue lang po tayo with our discussion on transfer pricing, and our topic is about business restructuring. Another example, na-explain ko na to kanina, yung conversion ng full-fledged manufacturer to contract manufacturer or toll manufacturers. Nasabi ko, services na lang yung ginagawa niya kasi hindi na siya nagmamayari ng raw materials at saka ng mga finished goods niya, work in process inventory. Sino may-ari na nun? Yung nagpa-toll sa kanya o kaya yung nag-engage ng services niya. No? Ito, transfer of intangible property rights to a central entity that an IP company within the group. No? So, ang dami pong gumawa nito. Halimbawa, meron ng intangible. Halimbawa, business name. No? Hindi ako mag-cite ng pangalan ng mga kilala dito sa Pilipinas, no? Kasi ma-quote ako na magiging transfer pricing issue sa kanila, no? Ano tong nangyari? Actually, sa nakita ko marami are doing that already. here in the Philippines. Ano yon? They create a certain company. Doon nila pinangalan yung intangible. What is that intangible? The business name. Ano yung business name? Yun ang ginagamit ng mga branches. No? Yun ang ginagamit ng mga separate company. The same lang sila na owner, no? The same lang sila na pangalan, pero yung owner nag-operate doon sa store na yan, sa mall na yan, ibang company na. Pero isa lang ang pangalan. Kaya ang akala mo, isa lang may-ari all over the Philippines kasi naglilipa na yung mga supermarket na yan, isa lang pangalan. Pero kung tingnan mo pala, bawat mall, ibang korporasyon nagmamay-ari. No? So, related party. So, anong mangyayari doon? Since ginagamit nila yung isang pangalan, hanapin mo ngayon kung sino yung nagmamay-ari ng pangalan na yan. No? Because yung nagmamay-ari ng pangalan na yan, yun ang nagbibigay sa kanila ng franchise, nagbigay sa kanila ng permit to use the name. So, yung permit to use the name, na kilalang kilala, malaki, so may pangalan na sa market, no? Ang daming pumupunta, ang daming nagsha-shopping. So, yung pangalan na yan, ipinangalan nila sa isang company, and all the companies that uses the name will pay royalty payment to that certain company. At anong ginawa nila? That certain company, sinituate nila in other parts of the world na ang tawag doon tax haven because napakababa and sometimes no tax at all. No? So, kung halimbawa, no, example, yung royalty na babayad nila for the use of that name, halimbawa, 1 million yan o 500 million yan, binayad nila sa isang company na nandun sa malayong lugar, no, outside the Philippines, na ang tax is only 5%. Doon sila nagbayad. O, palagay mo na, ang binayad sa group of companies is 500 million in a year. O, how much tax ang natipaid? Kasi kung dito yan binayaran sa Pilipinas at walang expenses or whatever, sa 500 million mo, times 30%, o magkano yan? 150 million. Samantalang doon, babayaran, kakaunti lang. So, ang laki ng tipid in the payment of taxes. So, since nagbayad sila ng royalty in the payment of name for the use of the name, that is a valid expense here in the Philippines. So, 500 million binayad nila dun sa company for the use of the name. They claim that 500 million as expense dito sa Pilipinas. And how much is the benefit? 150 million also because 30% nung expense na yon supposed to be is the income tax. Nag-claim sila ng deduction. So, nakatipid sila ng 30% sa income. No? Sa 500 million, that is 150 million. Napakalaki. Okay. Ano pa yung mga restructuring activities? More intangibles and or risk allocated to operational entities. Ang dami po yung ganyan na. Kasi isa lang naman yung advisor nila. Ang risk allocated to operational entities, gumawa ng isang company na naman na nandoon sa isang country na hindi masyadong mahigpit, and then nandoon yung mga intangibles na marami, and then ina-allocate yun sa mga operational entities all over the world. No? So, ano dapat yan? Dapat arm's length. And when you say arm's length, yung pricing nila should be same with the independent party transactions doing that same kind of activity. Another restructuring activity, nationalization, specialization, or despecialization of operation. Ano yun? Nationalization, specialization, or despecialization of operation. So, strategy din po nila na, halimbawa, i-national nila yung operation or i-despecialize nila of operation. Instead na i-nationalize, nilagay na nila sa very specific na lang sa kung saan na lang yung kanilang branch, no? Hindi na national. Downsizing of operations. So, binawasan yung operations kasi lugi or losing or closing the operation. That can either be form of restructuring, no? Closing the operation. What are the reasons for restructuring? No, these are the reasons for restructuring. It could be to maximize synergies and economies of scale. Anong ibig sabihin ng synergy or economies of scale? Synergy, yung ano bang sabi natin sa synergy? No part is better than whole. No? Parang teamwork na ano nila. Increase nila yung teamwork. And then, ano yung economies of scale? Ito economies of scale, ito yung discount na makukuha mo kung nag-volume sale ka. Kaysa bibili kayo ng pa-isa-isa, pag bumili kayo in bulk, kasi sabay-sabay, kung halimbawa, 20 or 30 or 50 na mall yan, imagine kung minsan lang sila bibili sa isang supplier, how much is the discount na ma-achieve nila because of the volume discount. No? So, yun yung tinatawag natin na economies of scale. To streamline the management of business lines. So yung mga may line of business operations tayo, no, na paiba-iba, scattered. So, streamline natin para our aim dyan is to make it profitable. Kasi kung titingnan mo, doon talaga ang bottom line sa profit. No? Also, the other reason for restructuring is to improve the efficiency of the supply chain, taking advantages of the development of internet-based technologies that has facilitated the emergence of global organization. So, tingnan nyo mga internet-based facilities. Bakit? Kasi yung supply natin, alam mo, nagtataka ako yung mga 2015, 2016 pa. No? I've gone to an international other country. Makita mo yung mga warehouses, napakarami. So parang ako nagtaka, why is it na nandito na itong mga warehouses? Hindi naman to market, hindi naman to airport lang naman to. So bakit ganito karami yung mga binibuild na mga warehouses? Kasi for ease of distribution. Bakit? Kasi hindi na i-display sa mall. No? Diretso na, from the manufacturer, diretso sa warehouse, diretso na sa consumer. Why? Because of the use of the technology which is online selling. So, bakit kailangan mo pang magrenta sa mall na napakamahal? No? So, instead of sa mall ka magbayad, sa delivery na lang. No? Diretso pa. Another reason for restructuring, preserve profitability or limit losses in a downturn economy in the event of an overcapacity situation. So, sometimes kung oversupplied ka, bababa yung presyo mo. That's why kinokontrol ang supply. No? In order to preserve profitability or limit losses in a downturn economy. Para ma-limit yung losses mo, kaya binabawasan na yung capacity, halimbawa, to produce more. Para hindi ma-over yung supply ng goods mo sa market. No? Kasi pag oversupplied ka, bababa yung presyo mo. Okay, may question?
Meron, ma'am. Pero shoutout ko muna, ma'am, si Ma'am RG Bustamante, ma'am.
Oh, Miss RG, hello. Hello, yung transfer pricing analysis mo, mamili ka na ng industry mo para at least may idea ka. And then, pagka may question ka, you just email to us. Para naman nakakatulong tayo sa iyo. Si Ms. RJ, siya yung katatapos lang po ng 5-day certificate program in transfer pricing at wino-work out po niya ngayon yung kanyang thesis which is the transfer pricing analysis. Okay.
Ito, ma'am, question galing po kay Ma'am Sandra Eborda. Okay. Ask niya lang po, ma'am, tungkol sa markup ng goods to sell. Meron po bang limit kung ilang percent pwede idagdag?
Actually po, wala. Kahit 200, 300% na idagdag mo, as long as may demand yung goods mo sa market, then be it. Kasi free enterprise po tayo. The more ka na nag-markup, the more po na gusto ng biyayarihan, kasi mas malaki yung value-added tax mo na payable at malaki ang income. No? Pero as to the markup na nililimit, wala po. Wala na?
Ito, ma'am. Galing kay Ma'am RG.
Okay.
Ang tanong niya po, meron po bang way na kung ang subsidiary may due to / from, other words, AR parent na ipasok sa equity, instead bayaran ng parent?
Restructuring po ang tawag dyan.
Ano legal na dapat gawin?
May permit po yan sa ECC kasi yan, additional capital, conversion of liability to equity. No, may permit po yan. Why? Kasi papasok na yan na equity. Papasok na yan. Issue nyo na shares of stocks. So, regulated na po siya ng Securities and Exchange Commission. And aside from that, magde-declare ka na kung sino yung may-ari ng stocks na binayaran mo. Sila ba talaga yung pinagkautangan mo? So, you have to present proof, no? Siguro, bakit ba nagkautang yan? May mga valid proof ka, halimbawa, yung promissory note, no? Yung mga loan agreement. So, ipapakita mo yan kasi para makita din kung sino yung legitimate na may-ari ng shares of stocks. Kanina mo i-issue yung shares of stocks because you convert liability to equity.
Yung palang mamulit ang question.
Okay. Sige. No, shoutout ulit tayo sa mga ka-YouTubers natin. Alam nyo na miss ko yung hindi kayo nabati noong free bookkeeping. Nakapakarami doon na parang feel mo talaga na they are participating in the discussions. At sorry pa rin po pala, I want to say sorry. Kasi meron tayo mga face-to-face na seminar. Alam nyo, parang nadala din ako doon sa mga face-to-face. Nakakalimutan ko yung YouTubers. No? Kasi andito sila sa harap ko, bigla na lang silang magbabat in, explain ka, bigla silang sasagot. Tapos sasagutin ko rin, naiiwan ko yung YouTubers. No? So, pasensya po doon. Kasi parang neophyte tayo sa YouTube. No? But sabi ko nga, I still have so many things to improve sa online. No? Kasi naiiwan. Nasasagot ko, may suggestion doon na ano ba yan? Yung dapat daw maririnig din nila yung question so that during the discussion, alam nila kung ano yung dinidiscuss, which is naiiwan sila. No? Ari, yun yung nakita natin doon sa mga feedback. No? Sana naman naririnig din namin yung questions. Dapat may mic pala tayo doon sa face-to-face para hindi naiiwan yung mga YouTubers natin. Kasi hindi nila alam ano nang dinidiscuss natin. And during the time, yun siguro yung ang daming lull moments na nandoon tayo sa face-to-face, naiiwan yung mga YouTubers. No? So, pasensya po. At we promise na next time, na lang, we limit, no? Hindi, siguro, magkaroon na tayo ng house rules before pa the online na yung mga nag-face-to-face dito, hindi sila pwedeng mag-bat-in. No? Penalize natin sila. Sila pwedeng mag-bat-in during the discussion, after na lang. No? Kasi, nung nakaraan, bumawi naman tayo dun sa day 2 kasi lahat ng questions, nag-extend tayo ng time just to answer questions para naman medyo makabawi tayo kasi yun nga, nakita ko parang hindi pa talaga siya ganun kaganda, no? Naiiwan, and then nagiging lal ang YouTube. Kasi, pakinggan mo pa yung kanilang question na hindi naman naririnig ng YouTubers. No? Okay. Sarap ang kape. Kakape na kami, no? Okay, so what is the legal, economic, and accounting effect of business restructuring? No? Kasi pag may business restructuring, ibig sabihin may restructure ka, may binago ka. So anong effect niyan sa legal as to the ownership, at saka sa accounting, no? As to the recognition, valuation, measurement ng assets or ng resources na ni-restructure mo. So may effect po yun. Anong sabi po dito? Business restructuring should conform to the arm's length principle under Article 9 of the Model OECD Tax Convention for transactions involving two or more taxing authorities or cross-border transactions. Ano po itong Article 9 of the Model OECD Convention? Ito po yung very authoritative basis of the arm's length principle. Ano po sinasabi dito sa Article 9 of the Model OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines or OECD Model Tax Convention on Income and Capital, na ito din po yung basis ng OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. Ito po yung nagsasabi na where transactions were made between related parties in their commercial or financial transactions which differ from those between related parties, no? then such transactions or amount that should be included in the profit of one enterprises, but by reason of those conditions have not been accrued, should be included in the profit of that other enterprise and taxed accordingly. So yun po yung sinasabi na very authoritative statement, no, na basis ng arm's length principle. Anong sabi dyan? Kung yung income na hindi na-include pero dapat i-include, should be included in the profit of that enterprise and taxed accordingly. No? Kasi which differs, ibig sabihin, yung related party na transactions differ from that of the independent party. So ibig sabihin, nag-iba siya. So ano pala dapat? Dapat similar. No? Kasi pag hindi na, nag-iba na siya, then that should be taxed accordingly. No? Magkakaroon ng adjustment. So, yun po yung sinasabi ng Article 9 of the OECD Model Tax Convention on Income and Capital. Alam niyo, bumili ako ng ganyang libro. That cost me 40,000. No? At ano lang yung naano ko, there are only 25 articles. Napakaiksi lang ng mga articles. Alam niyo, ano yung makapal doon? The commentaries. Kung bakit sila nag-argue on that articles na napakaiksi lang. And then the history, kung bakit nagkaganon yung mga treatment nila. No? So, doon ko lang na parang naintindihan yung mga treatment natin sa taxes. Kasi kung tayo lang dito, yung Center for Tax Administration kasi ng OECD, sila yung gumagawa talaga ng policies natin on international taxation. And once nagawa na nila yan, it is being cascaded to the tax authorities in the world, no? Different. And then, nagkakaroon ng local legislation. Ina-adapt yan, and then, magkakaroon ng local. Kasi wala naman talaga tayong iisang international tax laws na sinusunod, no? Ang sinusunod natin sa tax laws, local legislation, kanya-kanyang local version ng taxation. Kaya, ang ginagawa nitong Center for Tax Policies and Administration of the World, gumagawa lang sila ng mga policies and guidelines, and then kinakascade lang doon sa mga tax authorities, ina-adapt lang nila. Okay? So, doon mo malaman kung bakit nagiging ganon ang sitwasyon, nagiging ganyan yung mga senaryo, nagiging ganyan ang articles or yung batas, kung bakit siya nagkaganon. Kasi, matitrace mo yung history. No? Minsan, ang pinagtatalunan doon yung term lang eh. No? Example ito yung pinagtalunan na nakarating sa Supreme Court na natalo yung tax authority or the IRS. Pinagtalunan lang doon kung ano yung mga kasama sa word na intangibles. Oh? So, sabi ng IRS, kasama lahat. Pati na yung mga list of customers, lahat ng mga customers na nilipat mo doon sa bagong company, lahat na yung mga anticipated income mo. O, sabi naman ng taxpayer, hindi kasama yun. Kasi according to the definition ng intangibles, ito lang yung mga intangibles, bakit mo isama yan? Kaya yung definition matters sa taxation. Kasi, pag nag-define ka ng isang word, at pagdating na sa korte, isama mo yung hindi kasama doon, talo ka na. No? Kaya ginawa ng US noong 2017, gumawa naman sila ng regulation pa that clarifies yung word na intangibles. So, kasama lahat, all-encompassing. Kaya sabi nila, kung yung kaso na yon nangyari noong 2017 or 2018, then panalo sana yung tax authority. But because it happens noong early 2000, talo yung tax authority doon. No? Because of just a mere definition. That's why definition is very important. Okay, ano yung ating transfer pricing law in the Philippines, Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code. Ano pong sabi? Allocation of income and deductions, no? In the case of two or more organization, ito po yung sabi ng Section 50. Allocation of income and deductions in the case of two or more organization, trades, or businesses, whether or not incorporated and whether or not organized in the Philippines, no? Owned or controlled indirectly by the same interest, if he determines, meaning the commissioner, that such distribution, apportionment, or allocation is any such organization, trade, or business, then the commissioner has the authority to assess or to add that income in order to tax the entity involved, no? Kasi bakit? Hindi niya isinama yung income. Alam mo yung totoong nangyari during the audit? Undeclared yung income, overclaim ang expenses. So anong nangyari diyan? Pagka ginawa mo yan both, overclaim ang expenses, malaki ang expenses. Underdeclared ang income, o double kill ang income tax. Bakit? Binawasan mo yung income, dinagdagan mo yung expenses. So, halimbawa, ang income mo should be 200,000. Should be 200,000. Dineclare mo 100 lang. Ang expenses mo dapat 80,000. Ginawa mo 100,000. So, overclaim. May income ka pa. Wala na. Kaya, net loss, puro net loss. Bakit? Overclaim deductions, underclaim income. No? So, yun ang nangyayari. Kaya nung sabi ng BAR, fraudulent na pagka 3 years, hindi mo patinigil yung business mo na losing ka naman. Ano ka? Marami kang pera na yung pera mo, including your effort, sinasayang mo lang at lugi ka ng lugi. So, ibig sabihin, fraudulent. What is the economic effect of business restructuring? Economic forces in the market is defined as the extent to which firms influence price varies across the market structures. So the economic effect of business restructuring is determined by the influence of the pricing of goods and services involved in the transactions. So yun ang economic effect. Ano ba ngayon yung price ng goods and services na involved in the transactions, no? Kasi malalaman mo yun kung because of the business restructuring and then the pricing of goods and services is lower than the market, then you have to adjust. Bakit? Kasi ang sabi nga natin, what is the real price is the market, which has which both seller and buyer has no influence over the price of the market. So yun ang totoong price. Okay? May question pa? Wala pa? Okay.
Wala po. Nakikinig pa rin po.
Break time lang po ng 10 minutes, no? CCR lang. Sige. Shoutout ka muna, Alvin.
Sige po, ma'am.
Diyan pa? Okay. So, hello. I'm back. Okay. So, continue po tayo with our discussion on business restructuring, and this time, it's about the accounting effect of business restructuring. No? Okay. Business restructuring undertaken by the M&E Group should be properly recorded and substantiated in the books of accounts. Kasi yan naman yung rule natin sa accounting, di po ba? Kaya nga nagbibigay tayo sa inyo ng free bookkeeping. Why? Because ang sabi ko sa inyo, that bookkeeping is the heart of accounting. Because it started with the recording of the business transactions and also kung ano yung mga supporting documents, no? So, ganun din sa business restructuring natin. Dapat recorded din siya in the books of accounts and also properly substantiated. So, Revenue Regulation Vidas 1 requires all taxpayers to pay taxes in the Philippines to record the transaction in the books of accounts stamp received by the BIR kung manual. And, di ba meron tayong tatlong kind of books of accounts, can be manual, can be loose leaf, or the computerized accounting system. Oh, so, pwede din yan. Okay. Ito pa ang pinaka marami actually na consideration in restructuring, the special consideration for risk. Ano po ba yung risk? Ito yung mga posibleng mangyari na dapat i-handle ng entity. No? What are the risks? Ito yung mga danger na dapat ina-account din. No? Risks are of critical importance in the context of business restructuring. Bakit? Bakit very important and very critical ang consideration ng risk? Why? Kasi when you restructure, there are risks. No? So, risk can be a source of transfer pricing issue. Bakit ba yung risk ay nagiging transfer pricing issue? Especially if yung consideration ng risk is not arm's length. No? Paano siya naging hindi arm's length? Halimbawa na lang yung ownership ng risk o kaya yung control ng risk. No? Yung control ng risk nasa party that influence the other. Ito yung investor over the investee, ito yung parent over the subsidiary. Andiyan yung control ng risk. And then, yung ownership ng risk, no? Who owns the risk? It can be the designated owner of the risk is the subsidiary. But if you try to look at it, the subsidiary has no capacity to assume that risk. So in that case, sino yung totoong may-ari? It's the parent company or whoever na dapat talagang mag-shoulder ng risk just like the manufacturer. No? So, very special po ang consideration ng risk. An examination of the allocation of risk between associated enterprises is an essential part of the functional analysis. Kaya nga doon sa comparability factors natin, di ba yung number 2 factor natin is the FAR analysis or the functions, assets, and risk analysis. No? So, nandoon, very important ang risk. In the open market, the assumption of increased risk would also be compensated by an increase in the expected return. Yun yung sinasabi nila na high risk, high reward. So, basta high risk yung product mo, dapat mahal siya compared doon sa product na walang risk. Although the actual return may or may not increase depending on the degree to which the risks are actually realized. No? Merong kasing mga bagay na high risk, no? Ano yung mga high risk? Yung mga risk na pumapasok ka pero wala ka namang capacity. No? So, sobrang high risk yan. No? Business restructuring often result in local operations being converted into low-risk operations or low-risk distributors or low-risk contract manufacturers and being allocated relatively low but generally stable returns on the grounds that the entrepreneurial risks are borne by another party to which the residual profit is allocated. So, sinabi natin na high risk, high reward. So bakit high risk yung binigay sa iyo, but the reward is small? So that's not arm's length. No? So dapat kung high risk ang activity mo, dapat mahal. Kasi may presyo din yung pagiging high risk. No? So halimbawa, nasa iyo yung risk, pero yung benefit nasa iba, then that is not arm's length. No? Bakit siya binayaran ng ganito? Hindi naman high risk ang ginawa niya. Bakit itong company na to, high risk ang ginawa niya, ito lang yung bayad. No? Kasi dictated, controlled ang pricing. No? So, hindi siya independent. Contractual arrangements are the starting point for determining which party to a transaction bears the risk associated with it. Kaya nga, di ba sa comparability analysis natin, may tinatawag tayo na contractual terms. One of the factor of the comparability analysis is the contractual terms. And we have to examine the provisions of the contracts, the agreements. No? Kasi kaya nga sabi ko sa iba, you review your contracts na dapat its provision, kung may transfer pricing issue siya, hindi arm's length, then you have to amend. No? Bakit? Kasi magiging findings yan during the transfer pricing audit. Nakikita ko yung mga old na documents na nireview ko noon, mayroon pang, alam mo, masaya lang sila. Parang, ang dami-daming linalagay sa related party disclosures na not arm's length, not arm's length. Talagang puno yung listahan na not arm's length. Sabi ko, hindi nila iniisip na itong nilalagay nila na not arm's length. Pwede itong i-disallow, pwedeng i-adjust kasi hindi arm's length. That can be treated as a sham transaction. No? Hindi siya totoong transaction kasi hindi arm's length. Okay. So, it would be a good practice for associated enterprises to document in writing their decisions to allocate or transfer significant risks before the transactions with respect to which the risk will be borne or transferred occur. So, ano yun? Document in writing. Oh, it's very important. Kaya nga sabi natin may contract or contractual terms. No? Sa civil law natin, meron tayo requirement na when to document a contract. Diba? Sa Statute of Fraud, Section 402 ng Civil Code. No? Ano yun? Pagka ang contract is such that yung fulfillment niya is more than 1 year, then you have to put it in writing. At saka the amount is 500 pesos. Dapat in writing na. Bakit? Para hindi daw makalimutan. Kasi ang tao by nature is makakalimutin. So baka yung utang, more than 1 year na, makakalimutan. Dapat ilagay na in writing. No? So yun ang rules natin sa contract. So, it would be a good practice for associated enterprises to document in writing their decisions. Kasi kahit na related parties yan sila, for tax purposes, they are treated as separate entity. No? So, at isang pala, yung paalala sa amin ng OECD, when you try to evaluate or examine also the contract, be sure na ang consideration nyo din is the contract being followed? Is the provisions in the contract followed by the two parties? Kasi baka mamaya formality lang yung contract, hindi naman sinusunod. No? So that can also be another form of consideration. Document evaluation of the consequences on profit potential or significant risk reallocations. No? Kaya nga, very important talaga yung documentation. Ano sabi po ng OECD? Please tell your clients, please tell your taxpayers to invest in documentation. Why? Kasi gagastusan mo rin ang documentation. And in transfer pricing, just to reminder, in transfer pricing, it is important that, ang sabi sa regulations, RR 2-2013, for documentation requirement, it is important that your document is contemporaneous, meaning existing as of the time of transaction. Hindi yung ginawa mo lang after na the transaction. Oh? So, contemporaneous siya dapat. Handun na siya during the transaction. The terms of the transaction may be found in written contracts or in correspondence and or other communication between the parties, especially email. Email is a rich source of documentation. Why? Because through the e-commerce law natin, even yung email natin are considered documents, no? Electronic documents nga lang sila. And it has the force of law or the yung visa nila ay kagaya din ng mga hard copy na documents. No? Where no written terms exist, the contractual relationships of the party must be deduced from their conduct and the economic principles that generally govern relationship between independent enterprises. Ang sabi nga, kung walang contracts, walang written terms between the parties, you can see that manifested in their dealings, no? Paano yan minamanifest? As if may contract, no? Pagka nag-deal sila with each other. So makikita mo yan, manifest through their dealings. Whether the conduct of the associated enterprises conforms to the contractual allocation of risk. Whether the allocation of risk in the controlled transaction is arm's length. So very important po yung consideration and the treatment of risk. Who owns the risk? Who controls the risk? No? And is the party who assume the risk has the capacity to pay the risk when it occurs? No? So yun yung mga important consideration ng risk. What the consequences of the risk allocation are? Example, no? Dito example na to. Halos na-discuss na po natin lahat ng sa restructuring. May question?
Meron, ma'am.
Sige.
Galing po kay Ma'am Marie Grace Randrop, ma'am.
Oh, sige po. Miss Marie Grace, she's very pretty.
How are existing contracts renegotiated for business restructuring purposes?
How
are existing contracts renegotiated for business restructuring purposes?
It's a management prerogative po, no? So dinidiscuss yan. Halimbawa, corporation yan, kakaroon sila ng board resolution, no? Kasi ito ang inexplain sa amin ng OECD, ha. Especially if there is already a terms of my contractual terms and then nag-restructure. So typically, kung ano man yung nasa kontrata, hindi yan natuloy, hindi yan natapos. Halimbawa, yung planta dito sa Pilipinas is 10 years, no? So may kontrata na yan dito sa Pilipinas, may mga documents na yan na 10 years dito. And then all of a sudden, on the 5th year, the management decided to transfer to Thailand, no? Kasi may mga factors sila nakita na mas ano. So anong i-consider mo doon? Since the terms of the contract, di ba, may leasehold yan siya o kung ano man yun, no? Nagpa-PESA registered siya, no? And then existing pa halimbawa, hindi pa natapos, lumipat na siya sa Thailand. Then you have to consider the effect of the terms of the contract when you renegotiate. Halimbawa na lang, there are loss of income because of the restructuring. Ano yung loss of income? The anticipated income na dapat 10 years, kulang pa ng 5 years. Lumipat ka na. So that anticipated income na nawala because of restructuring, may karapatan yung other party to collect for that lost income. So babayaran mo yun. So yun yung example.
Wala na po.
Okay. Anong oras na? 9? 26? 36. So we still have 24, no? Okay. So example na po tayo sa restructuring kasi examples are very important. Why? Kasi ito na yung application ng mga theory natin na pinag-discuss, no? So example, foreign associated enterprises assumes all the inventory risk by contract. Nasa kontrata. Sino yung mag-assume ng risk? Si foreign associated enterprises. Pag sinabi nating associated enterprises, ito yung mga subsidiaries, no, mga related parties, no. It may be relevant to examine, for instance, where the inventory write-down are taken. Whether the domestic taxpayer is in fact claiming the write-downs as deductions, and evidence may be sought to confirm that the party's conduct supports the allocation of this risk as per the contract. Kasi ano tong sinasabi natin na inventory write-down? Ano ba yung sa international standards natin on how to value inventory? lower of cost or realizable value. So, halimbawa, yung cost niya is 100,000, na-damage siya or na-deteriorate siya, 80,000 na lang. So, yun i-write down mo, no? So, instead na 100,000 siya, yung realizable value mo, 80,000 na lang. So, ang sabi dito, who will claim the write-down as a deductions? Kasi may 20,000 na na deductions. So, syempre, titingnan mo ngayon doon sa kontrata, who will claim that? Of course, the owner of the inventory. Kung sino yung designated na owner of the inventory, dapat siya ang mag-claim, no? It is in the contract. Ito po yung example doon. Okay. Third example relates to the determination of which party bears credit risk in distribution arrangement. Ito naman distribution arrangement, yung kanina risk, no? Risk yun sa inventory. Ito naman distribution. In full-fledged distribution agreement, the bad debt risk, ito naman bad debt, kanina write down ng inventory. No? The bad debt risk is generally borne by the distributor who books the sales revenue, notwithstanding any risk mitigation or risk transfer mechanism that may be put in place. Ano yun? Pag full-fledged distribution agreement ka, yung bad debt, syempre sa'yo. Kasi full-fledged ka eh. Pag full-fledged distributor ka, you own the inventory. So, dapat lang na pag mayroong bad debt, ikaw yung makikinabang doon. Sa iyo mo yun i-claim. No? Kasi, bakit? Full-fledged distributor ka. You own the risk, you own the inventory, at saka ikaw yung nagko-conclude ng sales. No? Ang principal mo o yung parent company mo, kahit na associated ka or subsidiary ka, you operate differently or independently from your parent company. Kaya nga, full-fledged distributor ka. No? The risk would generally be reflected in the balance sheet at year-end. Okay. So, reflected in the balance sheet at year-end, di ba? Yung sinasabi natin na disclosure requirements na restructuring. However, the extent of the risk borne by the distributor at arm's length may be different if the distributor receives indemnification from another party, from the supplier for irrecoverable claims, or if its purchase price is determined on a resale price or commission basis that is proportionate to the cost rather than invoiced revenue. So, ang risk daw reflected in the balance sheet at the end of the year. Bakit? Kasi nga, our financial reporting standards requires disclosure in our financial statement. The extent of the risk borne by the distributor at arm's length may be different if the distributor receives indemnification from another party. Actually, for BIR purposes, ito yung meron na tayong video din on the how to claim or report loss to the BIR. Ito yung Revenue Regulations 12-77. Take note, mga CPAs, mga practitioners, accountants, na yung mga bad debts written off nyo, yung mga inventory write-off nyo, can be disallowed for failure to follow or comply with that regulations. Why? Kasi ang dami po requirements dyan sa regulations na yan, especially the valuation of the loss. No? So, kung nag-value-value lang kayo dyan, kayo lang yung gumawa, hindi nyo pina-approve sa BIR, then that can be disallowed kasi questionable. No? Ano yung proper valuation? At cost. And then, dapat meron ka mga supporting documents ng loss na yan. Pero dineclare mo na lang ng loss dito sa income tax return mo, hindi ka naman nagpaalam sa BIR, hindi mo ni-report, and then wala ding report yung examiner as to the value of the loss that you claim. Then, that can be a ground na ma-disallow yan. At saka yung bad debts inventory write-off nyo, no? Yung mga obsolescence. So, dapat naka-report po yan. Remember, RR 12-77. No? Meron po tayong video dyan on how to report loss to BIR. Malaking tulong po yan sa inyo. No? Especially if inventory-oriented yung ating business. No? Ibig sabihin yan, mga supermarket, manufacturer of perishable goods, mga products, no? So, dapat meron tayong compliance on the reporting of loss. examination of the actual condition of the transactions between the parties, including the pricing of the transactions and the extent, if any, to which it is affected by the credit risk, can provide evidence of whether, in actual fact, it is the supplier or the distributor or both who bears the bad debt risk. Ito pa. Sino yung magkiklaim daw ng bad debt? Is it the distributor or the supplier? Siyempre, ang test naman doon, who owns the inventory? No? O kaya, sino yung nagmamayari ng sales? Siyempre, siya yung magbibear ng risk, ng loss, no? Ng bad debt. Kasi, nasa kanya nakakredit yung sales, no? So, kasi, hindi pwede yun na ang sales nakakredit sa isang party and then yung bad debt, iba yung magkiklaim. Then that is not arm's length. Okay. So, meron pa ring role of comparables, no? Kasi pag gumawa tayo ng analysis on the arm's length principle, di ba sabi natin, we have to compare. So, there is always the role of comparables. Sino ba yung magiging comparables natin in business restructuring? Okay. So, where data evidence a similar allocation of risk in comparable uncontrolled transactions, then the contractual risk allocated between the associated enterprises is regarded as arm's length. No? Kasi, nakapaggawa na tayo ng analysis and nag-compare na tayo and then we can say na arm's length yung transaction. No? Comparables data may be found either in transaction between one party to the control transaction and an independent party. No? Internal comparable or external comparable. No? Pag external naman, ito yung transactions between two independent enterprises, neither of which is a party to the control transactions. No? How about in cases where comparables are not found? No? So, ang sabi ng OECD, can there be transfer pricing kung walang comparables? No? Pwede pa ba na may transfer pricing pag walang comparable? Kasi sabi natin, the heart of transfer pricing is comparability analysis. Eh, wala kang may compare. Why? Because the business is unique. Wala siyang kapareha. Siya lang nag-iisa sa mundo. So, how can you compare? So, in that case, may transfer pricing pa ba? Sabi ng OECD, yes, meron pa. Because in case there are no comparables, then you hypothesize. When you hypothesize, and then you ask question, if the parties are not related, meaning they are independent, will they accept the terms of the contract, the terms of the sale, or the terms of the credit, or whatever arrangement that they have, no? Para matawag mo na arm's length siya. Kasi kung hindi, sabi naman ng OECD, transfer pricing is not an exact science. It requires a lot of common sense. No? Okay, so just because an arrangement between associated enterprises is one not seen between independent parties should not of itself mean that the arrangement is non-arm's length. So kasi, pag sinabi mo kasi na arm's length or not arm's length, then you have to prove it. No? That's why meron po nire-require yung ating mga related parties, especially here in the Philippines, na magkaroon kayo ng transfer pricing analysis. This is a must and this is a requirement. And when you have a transfer pricing documentation, this is very expensive. No? Meron akong classmate sa transfer pricing. When I took up the course with the IBFD, no? Taga-UK sila, with a famous accounting firm, mga big player na accounting firms in the world. No, sa UK, yung isang transfer pricing analysis nila is pinaka na sa kanila is 1 million euros. No? So, just imagine daw that how much money is that? No? 1 million euro. Ano pa yan? Minsan 1.3, no? Depending on the scope. Yun po ang presyo ng transfer pricing. Kaya those who wanted to be a transfer pricing analyst, we are offering the course to you, the 5-day certificate program, very, very cheap. No? Just imagine 25,000 for 5 days. Samantalang inaral ko yan, ang 2 days lang is 200,000. No? Kasi I want to make that available here also in the Philippines para hindi lang yung mga big firms yung nakikinabang sa transfer pricing, pati din po tayong maliliit, no? Kikinabang tayo sa transfer pricing. Where no comparables are found to support a contractual allocation of risk between associated enterprises, then it becomes necessary to determine whether that allocation of risk is one that might be expected to have been agreed between independent parties in similar circumstances. So, you hypothesize. No? You ask question. No? May question na? Okay. So, tatapos na rin to eh. In arm's length transactions, another factor that may influence an independent party's willingness to take on the risk is its financial capacity to assume the risk. No? Na-discuss ko na sa inyo, the financial capacity to assume the risk. Siya ba talaga yung owner ng risk? Kasi pag may nangyari yung risk, this company has the capacity to pay for the risk. No? So, siya yung owner ng risk kung kaya niya. Pero kung hindi, it might be that the other party, dinesignate lang sila. No? Per contract or per agreement. That determination that the risk allocation in a controlled transaction is not one that would have been agreed between independent parties should therefore be made with great caution, considering the facts and circumstances of the case. So, great caution, considering the facts and circumstances of the case. Pabalik-balik po talaga ito na sinabi po ng OECD sa amin. No? Kasi, depending on the facts and circumstances of the case. Kaya, no transfer pricing case na different or similar talaga. You have to study the facts and circumstances of the case. Para ma-apply mo, lagyan mo talaga siya ng analysis, no? Walang presumption, no? The reference to the notion of control over risk and of financial capacity to assume the risk is not intended to set a standard. Maganda lang siya na gawing reason, no, as basis, pero hindi daw siya standard, no, para masabi mo talaga na sino ba yung owner ng risk, no? Okay.
Ma'am, may question, ma'am.
Okay.
Galing po kay Ma'am Maya Polido, ang sabi niya po, kahit ho ba mga working capital advances to related parties,
yes,
dapat may supporting contract
yes,
or
po.
Agreement for compliance with
yes
the
po, actually ang tawag po diyan financing transaction, financial issues po 'yan. No? Transfer pricing issues in financial transactions. Financial transactions po kasi 'yan eh. Bakit? Kasi you're financing the company. Kaya yung advances to, advances from should be properly documented. At ang yung kanina na yung liability. Kasi liability yan eh, yung advances from, di ba? Liability yan. And then, kinonvert mo into equity. So, may permit na yan or may approval na yan sa SEC. At yung sinabi mo naman na properly documented, yes, it must. Especially if it involves millions of pesos, no? So, hindi yan biro-biro na pera. Kasi yung advances to, advances from, sa ibang bansa po, meron silang tinatawag na law on thin capitalization. Kasi ang liit ng capital, tapos ino-augment lang nila doon sa advances to, advances from, they are being penalized. No? Ang thin capitalization doon may penalty. Sa atin, wala. Okay.
So, ma'am, sabi po ni Ma'am RG, avail po kayo ng 5-day seminar. Salohin nyo si ma'am. Sulit.
One-on-one kami ni Ms. RG, no? Kasi siya lang yung nag-register. Tuloy kami. And then, okay lang din kasi may, ano pa naman, may pandemic. So, social distancing. Kaming dalawa lang.
Tapos ma'am, ito may question. Galing po kay Jam Mes.
Okay.
Out of topic question. Saang RDO po dapat i-process yung transfer ng shares of stock? Sa RDO po ba ng seller or RDO ng corporation? Magkaiba po kasi sila ng RDO.
RDO po ng seller. Why? Kasi ang shares of stocks po is a personal property. So it follows where the owner is. No? So halimbawa yung may-ari ng shares of stocks is foreigner. Foreigner siya. Ita-transfer mo yan dito sa RDO 39 kasi lahat po ng mga foreign transactions involving foreign companies or persons, dito po yan pinaprocess sa RDO 39. Pero kung meron siyang registered siya, any RDO dito sa Pilipinas, then sa RDO where the seller is registered. No? Basta ang pinaka-importante po dyan sa sale of shares of stocks, dapat meron kang stock certificate. Kasi pag walang stock certificate, mahirapan kayo magpa-transfer. Kasi unang-una, registrable po ang stock certificate. So, kung hindi registered, how can you transfer that? Okay, so ano oras na po?
9:53, ma'am. Time check.
Time check, 7 minutes na lang. Sa bagay, matatapos na to eh. So, relevance of the notion of control. Kasi we're still talking of risk as it is involved in the business restructuring, no? So, examination of which party has greater control over the risk can be a relevant factor to assist in the determination of whether a similar risk allocation would have been agreed between independent parties in comparable circumstances. Kaya nandyan palagi yung independent party sa yung related parties. So, kung wala bang control, papayag ba yung isang company na sa kanya mapupunta yung risk, no? If risks are allocated to the party to the control transaction that has relatively less control over them, the tax administration may decide to challenge the arm's length nature of such risk allocation. Kasi bakit? Hindi naman niya control yung risk. Bakit siya yung maging owner ng risk? No? So, that can be challenged. Ibig sabihin niyan, that can be a transfer pricing issue. When we say kasi issue, it is a point of dispute, parang gray area, so pinagtatalunan. Oh? So, halimbawa, yung tax administration, sabi niya, ang nagmamayari ng risk has no control over the risk. So, it will be challenged by the tax authority. Kasi, para ka maging owner ng risk, you have the control over the risk. Wala ka namang control. Bakit ikaw yung mayari ng risk? No? Okay, so control should be understood as the capacity to make decision, to take on the risk. No? Kasi wala kang control. You cannot make decision. So, bakit ikaw yung mayari ng risk? Okay. Decision to put the capital at risk and decision on whether and how to manage the risk internally or using an internal provider. Kasi how do you manage the risk? Kasi if you are the owner of the risk, then you have to do something to manage that risk. Kung sabi nga, ikaw yung sinasabi na owner ng risk, pero hindi mo naman ma-manage ang risk, hindi mo naman makontrol ang risk, then it shows na hindi talaga ikaw yung may-ari. No? Dinesignate lang o inimpose lang sa iyo. Okay. So, this would require the company to have people, employees, or directors who have the authority to and effectively do perform these control functions. Okay, sabi mo naman, ito talaga yung company dito owns the risk. Okay, the next question is, who are the persons involved or who are controlling those risks? No? Sila yung involved. Okay? When one party bears a risk, the fact that it hires another party to administer and monitor the risk on a day-to-day basis is not sufficient to transfer the risk to that other party. No? Kasi pwedeng inutusan lang din siya parang gawin niya yun Okay, so assume that an investor hires a fund manager to invest funds on its account. Then, depending on the agreement between the investor and the fund manager, the latter may be given the authority to make all the investment decisions on behalf of the investor on a day-to-day basis, although the risk of loss in value of the investment would be borne by the investor. So the investor is controlling its risk through three relevant decisions. The decision to hire or terminate the contract with that particular fund manager, the decision of the extent of the authority it gives to the fund manager and the objectives it assigns to the latter, and the decision of the amount of the investment that it asks this fund manager to manage. Ito, example lang to ng fund manager at saka yung investor. The fund manager would generally be required to report back to the investor on a regular basis as the investor would want to assess the outcome of the fund manager's activities. Ang parties involved dito, the fund manager at saka yung investor, at ano po yung risk involved dito? Yung investment ng funds. No? In such a case, the fund manager is providing a service and managing his business risk from his own perspective, no? To protect his credibility. Bakit? Pag fund manager ka, tapos lugi lahat yung minanage mo, wala namang papamanage sa'yo, no? So, the fund manager's operational risk, including the possibility of losing client, is distinct from his client's investment risk. So, magkaiba sila ng risk. Itong fund manager, ang risk niya, mawala siya ng kliyente pag hindi niya inayos yung management ng fund. Ito namang investor, iba naman yung risk na meron siya. Ano naman yun? Na malugi yung investment niya. Okay? An investor who gives to another person the authority to make all the day-to-day investment decisions does not necessarily transfer the investment risk to that person making these day-to-day decisions. Ibig sabihin lang, kahit nag-hire pa siya ng fund manager, pag nalugi siya, siya pa rin yung nalugi, hindi yung fund manager. No? Okay. So, yun yung mga questions natin. Yun yung mga examples natin. And hopefully, I do justice with the business restructuring, with all the examples and with all the explanations. No? And, wala nang question?
Meron, ma'am.
Okay.
Out of topic pa rin.
Okay lang.
Kay James.
Oh.
Ano-ano daw pong mga cost pwede magamit sa cost ng pag-acquire ng shares? Pwede po ba magamit notarial fee at other incidental expenses?
Hindi. Wala pong ganun. Yung sa acquisition cost lang ang nakalagay diyan, ano? Selling price and then the acquisition cost. Pero di ba wala na ngayon 'yan? Meron pa pala kasi 15% na sa train law, di ba dati meron tayong 5%. Pagka first 100,000 and more than 100,000, 10%. Binago na yan ng train law. Ginawa na niyang 15%. No? So, yung acquisition cost, ang tanong mo, is the acquisition cost of the share?
Acquire ng shares, ma'am.
Acquire ng share as a deduction? Yes, pwede. Kasi ano yan eh. As long as documented, pwede mo i-claim. Kasi ang karamihan, sa nakikita ko, ang cost lang nila yung acquisition or yung purchase price ng shares of stocks. Hindi na nila sinasama yung mga iba pa na notarization, doc stamps, hindi na nila sinasama. Pero in your case, pwede as long as you can document it. Kasi legitimate naman yun na expenses.
Ito, ma'am. Malayo talaga sa topic natin.
Hindi, okay lang. No,
ang tanong niya, ma'am Amy Tagle, yung advantages ng pagiging member ng PSTRI, ma'am.
Ay, okay. Very good po.
Legit member of
No, ang advantages po natin by paying 1,000 sa membership po, we offer to you our services. Ano yon? Pwede yung research natin, services, our library, and then our discount, no? 10% discount sa ating mga paid na seminars, no? And that 1,000 is only good for 1 year, no? Kasi non-stock, non-profit po tayo, and that's one way of augmenting our income for the maintenance po nung ating organization, no? And sa research naman, we have in our library, we have cases since 1901. So, kung may mga concerns kayo about tax cases, then pwede po kayong mag-email sa amin at titingnan natin. Tingnan nyo lang kung ano yung topic na, sabihin nyo na halimbawa, VAT or about income, then we can give you some cases. No? And even about transfer pricing, meron din po tayong mga cases on the international na transfer pricing na nakita ko naman. Halimbawa, transfer pricing case in Canada, ginagamit din po na parang jurisprudence ng Australia, no? So ganun po ang transfer pricing. Ganun siya ka-international, no? So we have also compiled international cases on transfer pricing and pwede rin kayo magtanong about it, no? Magamit ninyo. Okay? So anong oras na?
10:02.
Okay, so Thank you very much for our YouTubers and thank you very much for this opportunity na nakapagbigay kami sa inyo ng another task update. Hello, hello po. At pasensya na doon sa mga pagkukulang namin ng mga nakaraan at kami ay mag-i-improve pa, no? Please wait yung mga susunod namin na gagawin kasi ano na, hindi na kayo mapapabayaan kasi napi-feel ko na talaga na nandyan, no? At saka maraming concerns, hindi lang na address agad-agad. Pero ngayon magkakaroon siguro na tayo ng magmo-monitor talaga sa inyo so that ma-address. Kaya ito namang online streaming po natin just to augment nung mga time na hindi talaga natin na-answer lahat. And then, hindi rin natin na-answer kaagad doon sa comment. So, during the online streaming po, we promise na we will answer your queries. So, thank you very much and good evening. Doon sa mga hindi pa nag-subscribe sa atin, please subscribe to our channel and we promise to bring you more updates in taxation. And the aim of tax training is for you to have a better tax compliance. Good night, everyone. Say good night, Hari, and ano.
Good night po. Thank you po.
Good night po.
Okay, so that's Alvin and Harry. Sila po yung mga ITs po natin dito. Nakasama po natin sa online streaming.